Welcome to Dude-Eronomy, providing male-centered, biblical, and relatable conversation about theology, thoughts, opinions on either topical or current events. Now, let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Dude-Eronomy Podcast. I am Kurt.
And I'm Andrew Madison.
And this has been a very, very long time coming. I came up with the idea for Dude-Eronomy. Maybe it may have been 10 years ago that I thought it would be cool to do like a bro Bible thing.
Sure.
And I mean, Dude-Eronomy it fits so well. And I had the idea originally of sort of like zany, normal bros can love the Bible too. Type
Right.
type thing. But I think as I have matured, I think the emphasis of the show or what I sort of would like it to be has changed a little bit. So let me just first introduce sort of what we're trying to do here and what this podcast is. I know who needs another podcast, but I started seeing recently some podcasts of the female variety that are sort of in the vein of what I would like to do. So yeah, where does it come from? Dude-Eronomy just essentially it comes from this brain right here. And basically what I want it to be is I want it to be sort of a place where men can, listen in, get advice, hear good sound theology, hear interesting things about book reviews or testimonies or interviews. I think I would hope that we can get to that at some point. And especially, I mean, right now it's 2024, we're in the middle of an election season. I think things about current events and things with the culture wars and church news, there's been a lot of church news in the last couple of weeks. I think those are things that I would like to at least speak into. So, and this is just an example. Andrew didn't know this was coming, but like Tony Evans recently, it was a couple weeks ago, I think, stepped back from his ministry. I honestly hadn't even heard of Tony Evans until a couple weeks ago. He said, he's stepping back. He's a really big guy in the evangelical community. And he didn't even say like why. Again, this is just an example of what you might expect on future episodes. They didn't really say like they said he's stepping aside for sin that he had in the past, and they didn't really elaborate. What are my thoughts on that? What are Andrew's thoughts on that? And Andrew and I are gonna do something maybe is unique. I'm not entirely sure, but we're not gonna compare notes and jot down everything we're gonna say. None of it is gonna be scripted. Like I said, Andrew didn't know I was just gonna say that. So
yeah,
it's all gonna be sort of off the cuff. We're not gonna talk to each other about the topics before we get into them, so we have sort of fresh and original ideas. I mean, unless we think exactly the same, then that would be pretty boring, I guess.
Yeah, it wouldn't allow much dialogue. But I mean, a lot of what you said resonated with me. I mean, even just to remark about the Tony Evans thing, it was very, very vague, and I think that's.
Well, do you want to get into it?
Well, I mean, we can talk about it a little bit. I think it's really interesting the state of evangelicalism, and we have so many leaders left and right, seemingly. I mean, Mark Driscoll comes to mind, where you have churches make fairly vague statements. You have, people signing clauses that they can't speak about things, which complicates things. Like, church seems to be run like a business a lot of the times, and I don't know how wise that is.
Yeah, and it seems also like a lot of times that business is the head pastor. And so everything is sort of ordered to protect him. And
Right.
that to me is pretty gross. So my take on the Tony Evans thing is that, given that again, I hadn't heard of him, but given that he does have some sort of prominence, I think that it's sort of incumbent upon him to not foster rumors and scuttlebutt and gossip, and again, that's not him doing it, but he's sort of fostering an environment where that can sort of flourish. And I mean, I don't know, and again, if it's I have no clue again I don't know this guy, but if it was adultery, that involves his wife now
Right.
and maybe his kids. So that's definitely something to take into account. The the problem that I have is that, I actually was reading a couple days ago, I was reading something on Christian Post, I think, and someone commented like, "We don't need answers from Tony. He didn't sin against me. I don't really care."
Mm.
And the I actually replied, like I had to like get a password and all that stuff and actually reply because I was so adamant. Like, you don't understand. Like, this guy represents Jesus to people. And
Right.
and if you look actually just a few comments below that, people were saying, "Oh, it's just another Christian leader, like they're all hypocrites and stuff." That is
Sure.
exactly what Tony Evans has done. He didn't sin against you. He may have sinned against his wife again. I don't know. I have no idea. But he
Right.
didn't sin against me specifically. He sinned against the Big C church. And that's
Mm.
something that we can't, I don't think we can just look past and say like you're you're sort of you're playing into the devil's hands by saying, "Oh, look at all these hypocrites." Now, my retort to that would be, well, you haven't read the Bible because the Bible says that we're all hypocrites and liars. And but yeah, I think it gives fuel sort of to the other side. And the other aspect of this is, talking about people like Mark Driscoll. And look, we're not here to say like you should believe this or you should believe that about certain people. Like, if it's biblical theology and stuff, I think there are certainly things that we're gonna cling to pretty tightly. But again, have whatever feelings you want about Tony Evans or what he should or shouldn't have done, or Mark Driscoll or any of the leaders. But the problem that I see is leaders that are their whole, it seems like most of their aim is just to get back into ministry. Like, I'll sit out 6 months and then we'll see,
Mm-hmm.
like, we'll sort of like dip our toe back in the water and see where that is. That to me is something that I don't I like. I think there are people and this is going to be frank, but that's what we're doing here. I think there are people that have sinned so egregiously. Like, if I ever see Carl Lentz in a pulpit again, like, I'm gonna lose it. Like, you need to sit down and shut up and listen to godly men teach the word of God. Like, to me,
Well,
it shouldn't be that hard, but
right.
but
Well,
it,
you
it,
might
it
lose
is.
it. You
Well, it
might
is.
lose it, bro, because it's
Well,
gonna happen. He's
well,
already
it
trying
will.
to
Like,
get
he's at Mike Todd's church, right?
right.
And yeah, and he's doing like a comeback thing. He's on YouTube now doing stuff. But yeah, it's just, to me, it's like that shouldn't be the way of the church. Like, the church should be a place
Right.
where godly men, and we had an incident at our church, actually, I think
Mm-hmm.
before you were there, where one of the leaders was caught doing something that uh, is I mean, against one of the Ten Commandments, frankly. And our pastor said, "You know what? He's stepping away," and I haven't seen him since. And that was Christmas 2020,
Mm.
I think. And
Well,
frankly, I mean, he's obviously ashamed of what happened, but also, like, our pastor's not in a rush to like get him back in, and like, we need this person. And again, it goes back to the leaders that are trying to just do the bare minimum to get back into the pulpit. It's the business,
right.
because how does the business function if I'm not here? And
Well,
again, I think it's pretty gross.
yeah, and I think it sparks another huge conversation about American church, or in the West, I guess. You have cults of personality that are, I mean, when you think of a good church, I think a lot of people automatically go to, oh, who is the pastor? Who's
Mm,
the person, and what wisdom are they sharing? I think that's a lot of like the main thing people think about with churches, as opposed to like, okay, what are they doing like socially? What are they doing? How is the community set up? Are they loving one another? Like, the main emphasis is placed on this one person. And then you have our modern world, which lends itself to Twitter and quick takes and just small sound bites, and it just makes everything confusing. And it just, like you said, even with Tony Evans thing, it's like, okay, now everybody is speaking into it at once and wondering what the heck is going on. So being vague about it and not being upfront about it may not be the best way to go about it, right? Because um yeah, it's just it's a huge topic, bro.
Yeah,
It's huge. Just the cult of personality and everything. And like Kurt said, we don't need you guys to agree with Kurt and myself. We want you to come to an informed conclusion over whatever we're talking about, and Kurt and I will be learning as we go as well. But as we was thinking about like what this show means, I was trying to not dumb it down and make it like really easy to understand. This is a show talking about interesting stuff and how that interesting stuff relates to Jesus stuff, which changes who we are and who we become as men. That's kind of how I boiled it down, Kurt.
right. And so I came up with this purpose slash mission statement a little while back, and I haven't honestly edited it, so it may be changing in the future. I retain that right. But so this is what I wrote: providing male-centered, biblical, and relatable conversation about theology, thoughts, opinions, and other topical or current events. And that's really kind of the crux of it. Just we want to facilitate conversation. Again, we don't want to say like you should condemn Mark Driscoll or XYZ.
Right.
Like, I mean, I don't know the full story. I wasn't there, so I or Tony Evans. Like, I don't know. Like maybe, yeah, I don't. Maybe there's a really good reason that he's not saying anything, and I
Right.
don't know that, so I can't really be,
Sure.
the judge of that. But
I
we
I
want to
think
we want to be able to have those conversations and just make sure that
yeah.
people, again, bros or kind of guys mainly, are are sort of informed about what's going on in the church. What does the Bible say about pornography or other things, just
Hmm.
other things. We want to talk also about sort of Christian lingo, or like what is post mill and pre-trib and like all those things. Like I'm out to left field on a lot of that. So or like a millennialism, or what's the Armenianism, something.
Millennial.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff
There's
like
lots of
that we're
isms.
gonna. Yeah, so we're gonna dive into that and break some of that down. I think in the future we're gonna want, and look, we're gonna talk a lot about other type of stuff that aren't necessarily Christian based that men tend to like. I'm an addict for sports. When sports quit, I think I told you guys this. Andrew and I are in a community group, by the way, in a church in Hillsboro, Oregon called 26 West, and I think I told them recently. I forget what we were talking about specifically, but when sports shut down for COVID, I was having like physical withdrawal. I was like, oh my gosh, like what do I do? They were like in Dubai or like Qatar, they were still having like some sort of sports that were like they weren't it wasn't like soccer, it was like field hockey or something. And I'm like,
Sure.
I'll just watch this and get my fix. It was bad.
Yeah.
So I'm a big sports guy. I know Andrew likes
Oh
sports,
yeah.
maybe not to that degree, but yeah,
I've died
I'm
down a little bit over the years.
okay. Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
if you are to ask me what I'm doing most of the time, it's probably something in the realm of sports. But
Sports are a place, it's a community to be a part of, right? It fills a friendship part, it fills parts of our friendships with other people, and it takes our mind off of work, but it provides a community to be a part of. It's that genuine, sitting on the couch with somebody, going back and forth. And as you were talking about that and the withdrawals that you were having, I mean, that's kind of what we want this show to be. That's why we don't share our notes with each other, because we want that back and forth, that genuine, like, not a produced, we're not trying to do a whole production. I do hope that we grow and that we learn, and that this becomes a better and better listen for all those who are listening. But yeah, we're just excited to go back and forth and genuinely talk about things and grow, and we hope you guys grow as well.
yeah, and so one of the unique things I think about Andrew and I is that we are in, well, a few things here. As a church, we were going through First Corinthians. We just stopped for the summer, but we're talking about different stages of life. And First Corinthians goes through married and divorced and widow and single and sort of all sorts of stages of life, relationships really. But Andrew's married. I am not. So this is there may be different perspectives or things to share in that realm. One of the things that I want to equip men with, whether single or married, is the idea of a Proverbs 31 man. And I came up
Mm.
with that and I actually started a blog. I'm not going to link it anywhere, but I'm sure you guys will be able to find it online. And so the idea of a Proverbs 31 man is that so women look at Proverbs 31 as sort of like a guidebook to be like, oh, this is who I want to be to attract like a good man. Because if you look at Proverbs 31, the first, I think it's 1 through 9 are about sort of drinking and debauchery, but they're
Yeah.
they're the words of King Lemuel, and it's something that his mom taught him. So 9 through the rest of 31, Proverbs 31 is about who he should look for in a wife and and this is sort of what women are, it's sort of like their grounding in biblical thought because I think society, or maybe it's internal, they get a lot of pressure to marry, and I think this is something that and they have biological clocks. I mean, we don't have to, beat around that bush. Like they're made differently from us. And so I thought of the idea that, not only is this like what a man should look for as a Proverbs 31 woman, and I think a lot of women
Mm.
aspire to be that, but I think men also on the flip side have to be worthy of marrying a Proverbs 31 woman. So I started a blog around that, and I'm not going to link it because I don't really use it. I think the last time I used it was like 2 years ago. I wrote anything, but I'm just going to read a little bit of sort of why I started that blog, and that same reasoning applies to why I want to do this. So my sort of catchphrase for Proverbs 31, man, my blog was women of honor deserve men of integrity. And in verse we'll read Proverbs 31 9 through, or no, 10 through 31.
Then, yeah.
But in, what is it, verse 25, it says, strength and dignity are her clothing. And some translations say strength and honor are her clothing.
Hmm.
So I think back then I was reading NIV, now I go to the ESV. So it says strength and dignity, but strength and honor are her clothing. So I said women of honor deserve men of integrity. So it's the idea that like women aspire to be something, but men, like, you also have to be worthy of that person.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about it. It's very others focused in the sense that it's not just about what men should be, not just about what they're getting. Like, as you're looking at this and going, oh my gosh, I gotta find I gotta check out every one of these boxes on this long list to find a wife. Obviously, these are qualities you should be, looking for, but on the other side, you should be looking to what should you be giving to your wife as well? That others focused, not just selfishness. And I think that's part of what you're trying to say too, is your motivation is, who are you trying to be? Who are we trying to be as men with women in our lives, specifically, obviously with the one we want to marry and will marry, that's who we want to become. We want to become something worthy, like you said, of all of these things. Like it's because Proverbs 31, right? I mean, reading everything in context, right? That's a huge part of reading the Bible. It's it's reading in context, but if any man is reading scripture, a man or woman, what's the context of the whole book? Well, a man should be fearing the Lord, not leaning on his own understanding, listening to the parents' instruction, like all these important things that form and make us who we are. You go back to even Psalms, not walking in the way of the wicked, being planted by the waters. So there's all these things that go into that. Well, Lady Wisdom, which is a character in Proverbs that's talked about all the time that we should be seeking after with all of our being. Well, this is like mainly women, it's written to women or about women. It's the whole context of scripture points to that we're all becoming someone, right? We're all becoming like Jesus. We're all striving to be better. Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's exactly it. Like, yeah, you have to have character. You can't just sort of like,
Hmm.
well, I'm a Christian male and I deserve X, Y, or Z. Like you also have
Right.
to sort of be deserving yourself, and there are, things to do. So let me read Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. And I'm reading from the ESV. The header says, "The woman who fears the Lord." Verses 10 to 31 are an acrostic poem. Did you know that?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, acrostic, and it's a chiasm too. Did you know that?
What's that? I don't even know what that
The
is.
well, chiasm, it's kind of like imagine a sideways. It's in poetry, so imagine a sideways mountain. So things are building on each other at the beginning and end of something, and then they meet in the middle. And the middle, the chiasm for this, the kind of the middle part of whatever it's the proverb or whatever the verse is trying to say is what's kind of the point, or it's kind of an emphasis, and it
Okay.
chiasms on verse 23, which you'll obviously read about the
Interesting.
wife's husband known at the city gates. So very cool.
Okay. So I'm going to read Proverbs 31, verse 10 through 31, just to give some context. And I think, honestly, again, Andrew and I haven't talked about this. I think it'd be great if we read at least some scripture in each of because that's
Yeah.
that's where our basis is always going to be. So it is an acrostic. It is a chiasm, apparently. So an acrostic poem that each verse begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So here we go. An excellent wife, who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does good to him and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gate when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat of the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceit, and beauty is vain, but the woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gate.
This is the Lord. This is the word of the Lord.
And then, so this is sort of a statement that I wrote about my blog. And I started this blog in 2018. So I've had it for a long time. Again, I haven't used it in a long while, but I'm gonna just read from this statement here, and just it'll give you an idea of sort of where I'm coming from and what I want to do with this podcast here, Deuteronomy.
Hmm.
Proverbs 30. So this is what I said. Proverbs 31 is the jam for most Christian women, but a woman who believes that about herself deserves an equal man of honor and character. See, as a single man, I read Proverbs 31 not only as a roadmap to who I want to marry, but also as a standard for Christian men to be able to attract a noble Proverbs 31 woman. How can I attract this type of woman without being that type of man? And that is my why. And again, that's why I wrote the blog, but not necessarily this, but it all connects. I want to reflect and muse about the intersection of men, women, and the fallen world we all live in, and help further impress the ideals of Proverbs 31 on men and women. Men need to step up their game and build character to match a Proverbs 31 woman, and women to let them know that Proverbs 31 is a two-way street, that a man has to not only want a Proverbs 31 woman, but himself be worthy of one.
Hmm.
And so with that in mind, I also I do want women to listen. Like this is a male-centered show, and I mean, given that two men are the co-hosts, like we're not really going to be shy about that. But I think
Right.
we want to impress on women. You are worthy and you are valuable as well. And maybe there are things that men in your life are not exemplifying that maybe they should be, or maybe they are exemplifying things that they shouldn't be. So we're gonna, again, in the future, we would love to have interviews and guests. And I think that will also, they will be women as well. And I think we also want to make sure that we know that, again, that women feel like they're being heard and listened to by Christian men. If they're seeing things in the dating world, or
Mm,
if they are running into X, Y, or Z, or like, why do men do this? Like, we can sort of
mm.
maybe bridge that gap. So it's going to be male centered and male focused, but it's not going to be exclusively for men. Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, anytime you talk about the Bible's for everyone. God's written it and carried it through the ages, preserved it for both men and women. And just like we were talking earlier, everything's written in a larger context. So while this, Proverbs 31 is talking specifically about, womanly traits, which a lot of these are, she's this Proverbs 31 woman is intense. She's planting fields. She's a wheeler dealer, making deals at the crowd square kind of thing. So it's not like this is I don't know why I'm getting I don't even know where there's a series of books that are often written. It's usually by Christians, with like homestead wives. I don't know if you picked up on this, but I get an email every day with like free gospel ebooks, and one of the things that's always on sale for like a couple dollars is like this woman like homesteading with like a hair covering and stuff. Like I think a lot of
Hmm.
times what happens. I mean, I asked my wife about images that come up when they hear Proverbs 31 woman, and my wife grew up in the South in Texas. And it's that, ring before spring, the ideal, Southern wife, supporting your husband, but kind of maybe taking a back seat, staying in the home and not really, being the one that's talking and preaching and teaching kind of deal. And she talked to me about, you have the ministries that pop up, Proverbs 31 ministries, you have the books, you have the devotionals, you have these are her words, frilly lettering everywhere. So there's from an American's perspective, which both you and I guess it's assumed, but you and I are both American. There's a lot of culture thrown in there that women have to kind of maybe dig out of, is if for in many contexts, if they're getting it from the larger evangelical, the way it's being put forward. This woman's awesome in Proverbs 31, and like you're saying, it isn't just for men, it's for women too. And we want you to know that you're, like you said, Kurt, like this is they're worthy, and that there are men like you and I that are setting up this podcast to talk about how we can be better men that look more and more like Jesus. So
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we are both American. I'm actually wearing a USA soccer jersey right now because they played
it's
earlier today.
they
Um,
did they beat Bolivia, which my wife is
yep.
Bolivian. So
Oh, there you
it
go.
was her mom, my mom-in-law, was in a big city in Texas. She got on a bus and went and watched it with a bunch of other Bolivians. So
Fun. I did
yeah.
that. I used to have a Peruvian roommate, and whenever they would play, we would go somewhere and watch it. It was a lot of fun. But your faith journey has taken you out of country. Just give us a little, maybe like a 2 minute little snapshot.
Yeah, so grew up in the US in Oregon, around the same place that Kurt and I currently live. Hillsboro, Beaverton, Portland is what anyone outside of Oregon would know it. Dad was a pastor, and I always have followed Jesus. I've just my faith story has been growing in my understanding of who Jesus is and how big he is. But that adventure of knowing Jesus took me into ministry. And so went to seminary and went to Canada and lived with a tribe up there, an indigenous tribe named the Kitasoo and the Jejes, and lived with them for 3 years full time, and did that and led many mission trips and took youth up there and discipled through that. So, and was a pastor up there. So yeah, so I've that definitely has a way of showing me my culture because you're thrown into another one. And so that gives me a unique perspective that I'm sure we'll be able to get into every once in a while in this podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that you have that background. I'm kind of completely opposite, to be honest. The way that I
Mhm.
introduce my testimony is that I tell people that soccer was our family religion growing up. I could show you guys a picture of all the soccer jerseys I have. It's like women in shoes or purses sometimes. Like sometimes they can get really, they get into them. And I am the same way with soccer jerseys at sometimes. But yeah, so soccer was our family religion growing up. We were traveling all the time. We would go like Christmas Eve, and we almost never went to church unless it was Christmas Eve. And it wasn't until college I actually got in some trouble in college. I almost got kicked out, and
Oh
um,
no.
and that's a story for another day. But
Yeah.
needless to say, I had a friend in that time when I was going through that asked me if I wanted to hear his testimony, and I was like, "What's that?" And there's just a lot of stuff that he said that I couldn't explain and I couldn't deny, and I was pretty hooked, and it wasn't a linear path to get to here, but
Hmm.
yeah, through college, I didn't really go to church. And then my first two jobs out of college were overnight on weekends. I had graveyard shifts on weekends. So, like Sunday morning, I'd be just getting off work. So, I wasn't really
Hmm.
involved in a church. And then a bunch of sort of divine intervention. I found a church. It was actually the church that I'm at now. I've wandered to a few different churches, but I made it back. Just, I love where I'm at, always willing and wanting to grow more and more deeply. So, yeah.
That's what we
So
hope
that's
this will
gonna
do for. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. We just want to, again, we want to be a conduit. We just want to be a facilitator. Thank you so much for tuning into the inaugural podcast. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Dude-Eronomy Podcast. If you want a question answered or have a topic for an upcoming show, email us at dude-eronomypod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at dude_eronomy. And we'll catch you next time.